The hall looked like a dream. The chandeliers hung like glittering constellations. The flowers lined the aisle in perfect symmetry, pale roses and soft lilies swaying gently as if they were breathing. Soft music filled the air, a melody that sounded like love itself. Everyone was dressed in their best. Everyone looked like they belonged to a storybook, and I stood there in a simple dress, not because I didn't care, but because I had learned long ago that dignity could not be bought. The dress was modest, clean, and well kept. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't designer, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine, a dress I had bought with my own hard-earned money, and a dress I wore with pride. I looked around the room. I saw faces I recognized. Some smiled warmly at me. Some looked away, but most of them stared. They stared at my clothes. They stared at my hands. They stared at my shoes. It wasn't a look of admiration. It was a look of judgment. The air felt heavy. The room felt too bright. The music suddenly felt loud. My heart began to race. I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself to stay calm. I told myself to be strong. Because this was my daughter's day, and she deserved my strength, I glanced at the front of the hall. There, standing beside the altar, was my daughter. She looked like a princess. Her hair was pinned in perfect waves. Her dress was delicate and shimmering. Her eyes were bright. Her smile was beautiful. She was walking toward the man she loved. And I felt my chest tighten, because I remembered the day she was born. I remembered her first cry. I remembered her first steps. I remembered her first day of school, holding my hand so tightly as if I was her entire world. And now she was walking toward a man she believed would love her forever, a man she believed would protect her, a man she believed was her future. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to smile. I wanted to be proud, but I couldn't ignore the way he looked at me. The way he looked at me as if I was beneath him. The way he looked at me like I was a mistake. The way he looked at me like I didn't belong in this room. He stood there, handsome and tall, dressed in a suit that looked like it cost more than my entire wardrobe. His smile was confident. His eyes were cold. His parents stood behind him. They were elegant. They were perfect. They were the kind of people who looked like they had never worked a day in their lives. They were the kind of people who looked down at everyone else. I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel their laughter before it even came. And then it happened. My daughter walked down the aisle. The music swelled. The guests stood. Everyone looked at her. Everyone smiled. Everyone whispered. And then my daughter's eyes found mine. She looked at me. She smiled. Her smile was full of love. Full of trust, full of hope. I smiled back. I nodded. I wanted to tell her, asterisk, it's okay. I'm here. I love you. Asterisk, but before I could, the fiancé leaned toward his mother and said something. His words were not meant to be heard by anyone else, but they were, because his voice was loud, because he wanted them to be heard. He said, "Look at her." He laughed. "Does she really think she belongs here?" His mother chuckled. His father smiled smugly. I felt my heart sink. My daughter's smile faltered for a moment. She didn't understand. She didn't hear the words. Or maybe she did, and she was trying to ignore them. But I heard them, and I felt the shame rush through me like fire. My eyes burned. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave. I wanted to protect her from this moment, but I couldn't, because she was already walking toward him, and I was already standing there. So I stayed. I watched. And I waited. The ceremony continued. The officiant spoke. The vows were exchanged. The rings were placed. The crowd applauded. The world around me blurred. Everything became distant. All I could see was my daughter. All I could hear was her laughter. And then the fiancé did it. He turned to me. He spoke loudly. He didn't whisper. He didn't try to be subtle. He didn't even try to hide his contempt. He said, "My future mother-in-law, she's a local bum." The words hit me like a punch. The room went silent. The music stopped. The guests froze. My daughter's smile vanished. Her eyes widened. She looked at him, then she looked at me. I saw the confusion in her face, the disbelief, the pain. She didn't understand. She looked like she wanted to say something, but she didn't know what. She looked like she wanted to defend me, but she didn't know how. The guests stared. Some looked shocked. some looked uncomfortable, some looked away, pretending they didn't hear. The fiancé's parents laughed. They laughed loudly. They laughed as if this was a joke. They laughed as if I was nothing, as if my life was a punchline, as if my love for my daughter was meaningless. I felt my throat tighten. I felt tears burn my eyes, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't lash out. I simply smiled, not because I was happy, but because I had learned long ago that the most powerful response was calm. The most powerful response was dignity. The most powerful response was silence. My daughter continued walking. She didn't look back. She didn't stop. She didn't run. She was brave. She was perfect. She was trying to believe in him, and I didn't want to ruin that. So I swallowed my pain. I swallowed my pride. I kept my smile, and I watched my daughter become a bride. When the ceremony ended, people cheered, they hugged, they took photos, they celebrated, but I stood there with my heart breaking. I saw my daughter's joy, I saw her trust, I saw her love, and I knew she was blind to the truth. I knew she didn't see the man's cruelty. I knew she didn't see the way he looked down on me. I knew she didn't see the way his family treated us. And I knew I had to do something, but not now, not today, not in front of her, not on her wedding day. So I did the only thing I could do. I smiled, I walked beside her, I held her hand, I pretended everything was perfect. And I promised myself that I would reveal the truth soon, and when I did, they would all see. The reception hall was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the soft music that made people sway as if their bodies were made of light. The air smelled like roses, an expensive perfume. It was the kind of atmosphere that makes you forget everything else. Kind of atmosphere that makes you believe that life is simple, that love is pure, that everything is fine. But as I stood near the edge of the room, watching my daughter dance with her new husband, I felt something inside me crack. Not because I didn't want her to be happy, but because I couldn't stop seeing the truth that was hidden behind the smiles. Behind the music, behind the glitter, behind the joy, I watched her. I watched the way she laughed. I watched the way she looked at him. She looked like she believed in him with her whole heart. She looked like she trusted him. She looked like she was finally safe, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout. I wanted to run to her and tell her the truth. But I couldn't, not today, not when she was already standing in the center of the room, surrounded by people who had come to celebrate her. Not when she was wearing a dress she had dreamed about since she was a little girl. Not when her happiness was fragile and beautiful. So I stayed quiet. I stood in the corner. I watched. I waited. The fiancé's parents approached me. They were smiling. Their smiles were polite, but their eyes were cold. They spoke to me as if I was an inconvenience, as if I was a stain they couldn't wipe away. His mother said, "You must be so proud." Her voice was sweet, but her words were sharp. His father added, "You look humble." They laughed lightly. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was a laugh of superiority. They didn't see me as a mother. They saw me as a servant. A nuisance, a problem. I smiled politely. I nodded. I answered as calmly as I could. "Yes, I'm proud." Then his mother said, "It must be hard for you to come here in those clothes." She gestured toward my dress. I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks. My daughter was nearby, laughing with her friends, unaware. I looked at the mother and smiled. "Thank you for your concern." She laughed. "Oh, don't be so sensitive." Then she walked away. I watched her go. I watched the way she moved, the way she held herself, the way she believed she was untouchable. I hated her, but I also hated myself, because I hadn't done anything to stop her. I had let her speak to me like that. I had let her humiliate me, and I had done it in front of my daughter. I had let my daughter see it, and I had done it all with a smile. I had done it because I didn't want to ruin her day. I had done it because I loved her. I had done it because I didn't want her to think that her mother was weak. But now, as the music played and the guests laughed, I felt a quiet storm inside me. A storm that was building, a storm that would not be stopped, a storm that would protect my daughter. A storm that would destroy the man who had tried to destroy her. Later, I excused myself. I walked to the back of the hall. There was a small room behind the kitchen. It was quiet, it was cold, and it was empty. I sat down on a chair. I placed my hands on my lap. I closed my eyes, and I let the memories come, the memories of the past. The memories of my daughter's childhood, the memories of the nights I had cried in the dark, the memories of the sacrifices I had made, the memories of the love I had poured into her life. I remembered the day she was born. It was a stormy night. The power had gone out, the hospital was cold, I was alone, but when she came out crying, I felt something inside me shift. I felt love, I felt purpose, I felt a strength I didn't know I had. I remembered the day she took her first steps. She fell, she cried. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, and I told her it's okay, you can do it. She looked at me. She nodded, and then she tried again, and again, until she finally walked. I remembered the day she came home from school crying because the other kids had laughed at her clothes. She said, "Mom, I don't want to be poor." I hugged her, I held her, I told her, "You are not poor. You are rich in love." I remembered the day she said, "I want to marry someone who loves me." I remembered her saying, "I don't want to be like you, Mom. I want a better life." And I had smiled. Because I wanted her to have everything. I wanted her to have the life I never had. I wanted her to have a husband who loved her. I wanted her to have a family that respected her. I wanted her to have everything. And then I remembered the day she met him. The day she called me excited, "Mom, he's so nice. He's so handsome. He's so smart." She was glowing. She had told me about him like he was a dream. I had listened, I had smiled, I had asked questions. I had watched her. I had felt something in my heart, a warning, but I had dismissed it, because I wanted her to be happy, because I wanted her to love, because I wanted her to be free. I had trusted her judgment, and now she was standing there, dancing with him, believing in him. And I knew she was blind to his true nature. I knew he was not who he pretended to be. I knew he had been hiding something. I knew he had been using her. I knew he had been lying, but I didn't know what, not yet. I only knew that something was wrong. Something was dangerous. Something was hidden. The room was quiet. The storm in my mind grew louder. I stood up, I walked to the window, I looked out at the night. The sky was dark. The stars were hidden. It felt like the world was holding its breath. I whispered to myself, "I won't let him hurt her." I said it like a promise, like a vow, like a prayer. And then I thought of the one thing I hadn't done, the one thing I had been too afraid to do, the one thing I had avoided for years. I thought of the private investigator. I thought of the secret I had kept hidden. I thought of the truth that would change everything. I had paid someone to investigate him, to find out who he really was, to find out why he was so desperate to marry my daughter, to find out what he was hiding. And the results had been devastating. The investigator had found records, records of fraud, records of lies, records of a past he had tried to erase, records of a life built on deception. And the worst part, he had been using my daughter. He had been planning to take her money. He had been planning to leave her. He had been planning to ruin her. I remembered the day I got the report. I remembered the way my hands shook. I remembered the way my stomach twisted. I remembered the way my heart broke, but I also remembered the way my mind went quiet, the way my thoughts sharpened, the way I knew what I had to do. I knew I couldn't tell my daughter now. I couldn't ruin her wedding. I couldn't destroy her happiness, so I waited. I waited for the right moment. I waited for the perfect time. I waited for the moment when I could reveal the truth without breaking her heart. And I knew that moment was coming, because the storm was building, the storm was coming, and when it arrived, everything would change. I went back into the reception. I stood near the edge of the room again. I watched my daughter. I watched her laugh. I watched her dance. I watched her smile. And I realized something. She didn't see the truth. She didn't see the danger. She didn't see the lies. She didn't see the man who had just humiliated me in front of everyone. She only saw love, and it broke my heart, because I wanted her to be happy. But I couldn't let her be blind. So I promised myself something. I promised that I would reveal the truth. I promised that I would protect her. I promised that I would make them pay, not with violence, not with hatred, but with truth, with dignity, with strength, and with the kind of revenge that doesn't destroy a person, but exposes them, because I didn't want to be a monster. I wanted to be a mother, and I would do whatever it took to protect my daughter, even if it meant breaking the world. The reception was in full swing. The music was loud, the laughter was loud, the joy was loud. Everything was loud except for the truth. The truth was quiet. It was hiding in the shadows. It was waiting. It was watching. It was patient. And I could feel it like a heartbeat in my chest. My daughter danced with her new husband. She looked happy. She looked radiant. She looked like she belonged there. And I hated that she looked like she belonged there. Because I knew what I knew. I knew the truth. I knew the lies. I knew the danger. I knew what the future held. But I couldn't tell her yet. Not when she was still smiling. Not when she was still believing. Not when she still thought this man loved her. So I waited. I smiled. I watched. I listened. I watched the fiancé's parents laugh. I watched them whisper. I watched them pat their son on the back like he was a trophy. I watched them enjoy the moment like they had won something. And I realized that they didn't know how fragile their world was. They didn't know how quickly a truth could destroy them. They didn't know how fast a lie could fall apart. I looked at the microphone on the stand. It was placed there for speeches, for toasts, for congratulations. Everyone expected someone to say something sweet, someone to speak about love, someone to speak about happiness, someone to speak about dreams. But I didn't want to speak about love. I didn't want to speak about dreams. I wanted to speak about truth, and I knew that the microphone was my weapon. I knew that the microphone was my chance. I knew that the microphone was my moment, so I waited until the DJ announced the next song. I walked to the microphone. The room fell silent. The music stopped. The guests turned. Some smiled politely. Some raised their eyebrows. Some whispered, "What's she doing?" My daughter looked at me, confused. Her smile faded. She didn't understand. The fiancé looked at me with a smirk. He thought I was going to cry. He thought I was going to apologize. He thought I was going to be weak. He didn't know me. He didn't know what I was capable of. I stood at the microphone. I held it with both hands. I felt the weight of it. I felt the eyes on me. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I was ready. I looked at the room. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the fiancé. I looked at his parents. And I spoke. "Good evening, everyone." My voice was calm. My voice was steady. My voice was clear. The room stayed quiet. I continued, "First of all, thank you all for coming." A few people nodded. A few people smiled. The fiancé's parents looked pleased. They thought I was about to say something nice. They thought I was going to praise their son. They thought I was going to pretend everything was fine. They were wrong. I paused. I let the silence hang in the air. Then I said the sentence that changed everything. I hope you all remember this moment, because the man you think is marrying my daughter is not who he says he is. The room gasped. The music stopped. The laughter died. The air felt like it was freezing. My daughter's face went pale. Her eyes widened, her hands trembled. She looked at her husband. She looked at me. She didn't understand. The fiancé's smirk vanished. His face turned white. His parents' smiles froze. The guests whispered. Someone whispered, "What is she talking about?" Someone whispered, "Is she drunk?" Someone whispered, "What's going on?" I looked at my daughter. I saw the fear in her eyes. I saw the confusion. I saw the betrayal, and my heart broke, but I didn't stop. Because I knew I had to finish. I had to finish what I started. I had to reveal the truth. I had to protect her. I had to make them pay. I took a deep breath, and I continued. You all know how people talk about wealth, about status, about family. You all know how people judge others based on their clothes, their jobs, their backgrounds. I looked at the fiancé's parents. I looked at their expensive jewelry, their expensive watches, their expensive smiles. Then I looked at my own hands. My hands were rough. My hands were worn. My hands were the hands of a woman who had worked hard. My hands were the hands of a mother who had sacrificed. My hands were the hands of someone who had never been afraid to struggle. I continued. You laughed at my clothes tonight. I saw the look of guilt in their eyes. I saw their discomfort. They wanted to deny it, but they couldn't, because the room was watching. I continued. You laughed at me. Then I held up an envelope. The room went silent again. The fiancé's parents stared. The fiancé looked like he was about to collapse. My daughter's eyes filled with tears. I spoke softly now. Inside this envelope is the truth. The fiancé's parents looked terrified. They knew. They knew what was inside. They knew they had been caught. I continued. This man is not the man you think he is. I looked at my daughter. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. The tears fell down her face. She whispered, Mom. I raised my hand to stop her. No, then I looked at the fiancé. You called me a bum. The room grew quieter. You said I didn't belong here. The fiancé's face twisted. He tried to speak, but I continued. You wanted to marry my daughter for her money. His eyes widened. His parents' faces turned pale. He opened his mouth to deny it, but I held up the envelope. I have proof. I began to pull out documents. I showed them the truth. I showed them the records. I showed them the lies. I showed them the fraud. I showed them the plan. I showed them the betrayal. The room gasped. My daughter's face went numb. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The fiancé's parents stood there like statues. They couldn't move. They couldn't speak. They couldn't defend their son. Because the truth was there, and the truth was undeniable, the guests began to whisper louder. Some began to stare at the fiancé with disgust. Some began to look at him like he was a criminal. Some began to look at my daughter with sympathy. The fiancé's hands trembled. He looked at his parents, he looked at me, he looked at his wife, and he realized he had lost. The microphone was still in my hands. The room was silent, and I felt the power of the moment. I felt the truth. I felt the victory, but I also felt something else. I felt the pain, because I knew my daughter was hurting. I knew she was losing her dream. I knew she was losing the man she believed in. And I hated that, but I also knew that this was necessary, because a life built on lies is not a life. It's a prison, and I wasn't going to let my daughter be trapped. So I finished. I said the last words. The words that made their faces turn pale. Tonight, you all witnessed my daughter's wedding, but you also witnessed the end of a lie. Then I stepped away from the microphone. The room remained silent. My daughter stood frozen. The fiancé stood trembling. His parents stood horrified. And the guests didn't know what to do. They were shocked. They were confused. They were watching a story unfold that none of them expected. And in that moment, I realized something. Revenge wasn't about violence. Revenge wasn't about anger. Revenge was about truth. Revenge was about justice. Revenge was about protecting the ones you love. And I had done it. I had protected my daughter. I had exposed the truth, and now the storm had begun. The room felt like it had stopped moving. The music had died. The laughter had vanished. The guests stood in shock, frozen in place like actors who suddenly realized they were in the middle of a nightmare. My daughter stood in the center of the room, her hands trembling, her face pale, her eyes wide with confusion. Her husband stood beside her, his mouth open, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. His parents stood behind him, their faces drained of color. They looked like they had been slapped, like they had been exposed, like they had been caught. The guests whispered. The whispers grew louder. Some people stared at me with sympathy. Some stared with disgust. Some stared with curiosity, but no one spoke. Because the truth was there, and the truth was undeniable, I looked at my daughter. I saw the tears in her eyes. I saw the pain. I saw the betrayal, and I felt my heart break. But I also felt something else. I felt relief. Because the truth was finally out, and the lies could no longer hide, I stepped forward. I held my daughter's hands. I looked at her and I said softly, "Sweetheart, I'm sorry." She looked at me like she didn't understand. She whispered, "Why, I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't want you to find out this way." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want you to be hurt." She shook her head. "Mom, I thought he loved me." I squeezed her hands. "I know." Then I looked at the fiancé, the man who had humiliated me, the man who had used my daughter, the man who had tried to destroy her. I looked at him with the calmest expression I could muster, and I said, "You called me a local bum." His eyes widened. He tried to speak, but I continued, "You said I didn't belong here." His parents shifted uneasily. I looked at them. "You laughed at my clothes." Their faces turned pale. They didn't deny it. They couldn't. The room was watching. I raised my hand again. I held up the documents, the proof, the evidence, the truth. I began to speak, slowly, deliberately. "I hired a private investigator." The fiancé's face twisted. His parents' eyes widened. My daughter's face went numb. "The guests held their breath," I continued. "He found records. Records of fraud. Records of lies. Records of a past he has been trying to erase." I looked at the fiancé. "You have been living a lie." He opened his mouth. He tried to deny it, but I cut him off. "I have proof." I placed the documents on the table. I let the guests see them. The truth was there in black and white. The fiancé's past crimes, his false identity, his debts, his plan, his betrayal. The guests began to murmur. Some people gasped. Some people looked horrified. Some people looked disgusted. Some people looked at my daughter with sympathy, but no one looked at the fiancé with respect any more. Because he had lost it all. His parents tried to defend him. They tried to say he had changed. They tried to say he was a good man now. They tried to say it was all a misunderstanding, but the room was not listening. The room had already seen the truth. And the room knew the truth. I looked at the fiancé's mother. She tried to speak, but I looked at her and said, "Your son is not the man you think he is." Her face went white. She whispered, "What are you saying?" I looked at her. "I'm saying he has been using my daughter." His father tried to step forward. He said, "That's not true." But I looked at him with a steady gaze, then explained this. I handed him the documents. His hands trembled. He began to read. His face turned red. His eyes widened. His mouth opened. He looked like he was going to faint. His wife grabbed his arm. She whispered, "No, no." But the truth was already there. The guests were whispering. The fiancé's parents were shaking, and my daughter was crying. She turned to her husband. She looked at him like she didn't recognize him. She whispered, "How could you?" He looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at his parents. He looked at the guests. He realized he had been exposed. He realized he had lost everything. He tried to speak, but his voice came out weak. I didn't mean to." He stopped. He looked at my daughter. He said, "I love you." My daughter's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head. "I don't believe you." Then she turned to me. She looked at me with pain. She said, "Mom, did you know?" I nodded. "I did." Her face fell. She whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" I squeezed her hands. "I didn't want to ruin your day." She shook her head again. "You ruined it anyway." Her words hit me like a blow, but I didn't argue because she was right. I had ruined her dream. But I also saved her from a nightmare. I looked at her. "I know." I paused, then I said, "But I would do it again." Her eyes widened. "Mom, I would do it again because I love you." She looked at me, stunned. Her tears flowed freely. She whispered, "I'm so angry." I nodded. "I know." She looked at the room. She looked at her husband. She looked at his parents. She looked at me. She whispered, "I need to go." I nodded. I wrapped my arm around her. We walked away. The guests parted. Some stared, some whispered. Some looked at me with pity. Some looked at me with admiration. But I didn't care because I was focused on my daughter. She was shaking. She was crying. She was trying to breathe. And I held her. I held her like I had held her when she was a child. I held her like I would never let go. We went outside. The night air was cold. The stars were hidden. The world felt empty. But in that emptiness, I felt something. A sense of relief. A sense of peace, because the truth was finally out, because my daughter was safe. Because the lie was exposed, and because the people who had humiliated me were finally facing the consequences. I looked at my daughter. She looked at me. She whispered, "I hate him." I nodded, "I know." She wiped her tears. She took a deep breath. She looked at me. She said, "Thank you." I smiled. "You don't have to thank me." She hugged me. And for a moment, I felt like everything was right. The storm had passed. The truth had been revealed. And my daughter was still alive, still strong, still mine.